Kelly, did you grow up in one of those nice houses, the kind with the plastic slip covers on the furniture?
No.
Well, this is Bog Panda. Tonight, obviously, we're going to talk about Night of the Demons. I am Dr. Mike, Edificial Pagan on everything, and joining me, as always,
Hi, everybody. This is Kelly at KELLYTHUL on social media. And if you get a chance, we'd really appreciate it if you check out the Bog Panda YouTube channel, subscribe, hit that bell so you can know when new interesting content comes out. All our content's interesting. And as you do that, be sure to stop by perhaps our most interesting content, the world's shortest podcast, Hard No, updated daily, free. So we got that.
free
And then
with
you
your free
can,
subscription.
that seems like a t-shirt, updated daily period free. So we'll have to jump on that. A bunch of new shirts coming out. They're not there yet, but you should check out the merch store anyway, because there's a lot of awesome ones already out there. More cool ones to come. So links in the description to do that.
Very nice, very nice. So I'm pretty excited. Obviously, it's Halloween time. We're doing our Halloween episodes. I always love doing these. Halloween's my favorite holiday. And I'm pretty excited because pretty recently you got to experience a classic slasher film that you had never seen before with Sleepaway Camp. And now another cult classic that you'd never seen before that I got to share with you, Night of the Demons. And what's cool about this is not only is this one of my favorite movies, it's also now a favorite of my wife's as well. I'm sure she would deny that, but she watches it every Halloween and just sometimes randomly. In fact, she also watches the sequels and remake. So a genuine fan, just like I am. Uh, Not only that though, but this ties into our very beginning of Squat Cobbler. Our first episode when we were still Squat Cobbler, my first recommendation on that show was the Night of the Demons soundtrack, which had been re-released around that time.
Yeah, I appreciated the opportunity. It was it was a slightly different journey than Sleepaway Camp, somewhat the same, somewhat different. Both 80s movies, both deeply 80s movies in many ways, but fun. And so if you haven't checked out Night of the Demons, so spoiler alert, thumbs up, enjoyed it.
Excellent. Yeah, I wasn't sure where you're going to land on it. We didn't discuss it beforehand. We saved it all for this. Um, so a couple quick things just to catch anybody up who doesn't know, and obviously there'll be spoilers for this 35-year-old movie. So I feel like we're safe talking about it. This was Kevin Tenney's second film after Witchboard. Witchboard is another movie that a lot of people consider a classic. The difference, though, is that Witchboard critics enjoyed that movie and did not at all for Night of the Demons. I remember even at the time, like being a kid, people talking about this like it was the worst thing that's ever happened to movies. But the movie was a big financial success, which has led to multiple sequels and a remake and tons of merchandise, which includes toys. So, so it didn't stop it. There's no such thing as bad press, I guess. And I've always loved this movie. It's really campy fun, and it's meant to be fun. Like it doesn't take itself seriously at all. And it pretty much lets you know that right up front. But it's not campy in like the Scream self-aware meta comedy sort of way. That's, part parody. Like it's fun in like a drunken trip to a haunted house amusement kind of way. So, what were you expecting coming into this versus what you got?
So I tried to steer clear of any spoilers, any sort of thing that would tip me off on it. So I came in pretty blank slate, beyond kind of knowing how these tended to roll in the 80s. And when I saw as it started, I mean, it becomes and it started as I might expect, very underwear forward in the first portion, in the first 15 minutes of
That's a t-shirt, underwear forward.
underwear forward. Yeah, that was one of my first notes. It's very underwear forward. So we started to get started to go, okay, so I'm seeing a lot of female characters that I bet you I'm going to see more of later. and so that was not too surprising. So I kind of came in not entirely knowing this track. I mean, as it played out, it tracked pretty much. There was no big shock to me. One of the, I guess, kind of the unique elements. Again, since we put that spoiler notification up a lot for this 35-year-old movie, but the old man at the beginning, I kind of felt sorry for him for a second. Then when he kind of tipped off to say, "Yeah, we got a bunch of apples and a bunch of razor blades," it's like, okay, I don't feel so sorry for you now. And kind of thought it was a weird kind of start to it, but then a payoff at the end related to that. So that was the one part that I hadn't really anticipated, beyond the fact of me scratching my head to say, so why did we get this little dose of this old guy at the beginning? And it paid off.
So in some of my behind the scenes knowledge of this movie, and there's a new special edition coming out. In fact, a new box set of the first 3 films. The third one, even a lot of like horror fans and fans of this franchise haven't seen. It's I assume rights issues. I know it was released on a smaller company. It's not as good. I'm gonna throw out there. It's the weakest of the franchise. But it's a much lesser known film unless you were willing to shell out for a really expensive import DVD. It never had a DVD or Blu-ray release here prior to this, and was difficult to find even on video. I remember having to really track it down when I finally saw it. One of the things going to the old man character. So originally it is weird, and as a kid, I didn't really like the wraparound with the old man. I think it's funny now, but like as a kid, it just seemed out of place, similar to what you're saying. So apparently there was a lot of changes to the script, which was written by a Philadelphian. I think that's important. There was a lot of changes to the script though. And the script originally had some sort of a wraparound story with a priest doing like a blessing on the audience for the movie they were about to watch. And that was one of the many things that was cut, but I guess they liked the idea of some sort of a bookend to the movie that wasn't the main characters, which is probably worth noting. So one area where this does deviate a huge amount from typical 80s horror and slasher kind of movies, it's not uncommon that you get a movie where it's a group of characters trapped in one location fighting to survive. It's usually a small group of characters, 3, 4, 5. There are 10 main characters in this movie just trapped in the location together. That is a weirdly large amount of characters
to and not a single likable one among them.
no And it's a weirdly large amount of characters. So that's kind of worth noting. Also too, there's supposedly a lot of changes from the script. Obviously I never read the script. I think the most noteworthy ones that I've read about though were originally, among the massive amount of characters that this movie is juggling, was a gay couple, and that was cut out because the 80s. And also it was going to have an interracial kiss in it, and that was cut out as well from the script. So because the 80s.
Yeah, and I did a little poking around post movie too, and it kind of, I'll come back multiple times probably to the not a single likable character in this one. At the top of the pile for me is the little brother at the beginning, who, boy, my fingers were crossed that he was going to meet a bad end. And I guess in an early version, he played a much bigger role.
Yes. Yeah.
And actually showed up at the house that they're all kind of trapped in. And I'd have liked to have seen him taken out, because he, in very limited time, became someone I was not a fan of at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I always felt like I hadn't known that, obviously, when I originally saw it. It's something I learned later, that he was originally supposed to have a bigger role in it. But pesky child labor laws wouldn't allow them to shoot with this kid in the middle of the night in South Central LA, which is where this was shot. They do a really good, for such a low budget movie that was shot in a short amount of time. The one thing from a technical perspective they do excellently is it does feel like it's an isolated location they're at. like the typical almost cabin in the woods type thing. Only this time it's, old funeral home on the outskirts of town. They're in downtown, like central LA. So they are surrounded by buildings, heavy traffic on a major highway. And it never looks that way. They do a great job of shooting around it all. And this is pre CGI where they could just, cut all that out. So they actually do a really good job of making it seem like it's an isolated location when it's not at all. This is actually, the location is now a supermarket. So this is right on a major highway. Also too, I don't know if you came across in your writings this movie's connection to the Little Mermaid.
No, I got the fact that Jill Terashita played Franny. She was actually in Sleepaway Camp 3. So I
Yes.
got
Yeah.
that connection, but no, I didn't get the what you were talking about.
So one thing I love in movies that I will always praise a movie that does this is an animated title sequence. I'm a big fan, just like we're both big first song guys on albums. I'm a big fan of title sequences in movies. Most movies have some sort of title sequence because it's a contractual thing with the unions to make sure they're crediting people. So there's some sort of title sequence. And if you grew up in the 80s watching movies, in the 80s into the 90s, nearly all movies title sequences were a black screen with white letters on them. And they went on for like 3 minutes in the beginning of the movie. So when they would do something with that, now we usually get it over the movie. That was not the thing they did back then. It was black screen, white letters, boring. So when they would do something with the opening titles, it was pretty rare at that time. So I always gave a movie extra credit sort of for that. And if they went crazy and did something like an animated sequence, and this does, it's a cool little animated short that was done by Disney animators who were at that time working on Little Mermaid.
Okay, so that makes a ton of sense because a couple of the notes that I had on the opening title sequence, which was it was notable
Mm.
because it was a pretty cool way to start it off. Was one, and I think this comes back to your back in the day your original soundtrack recommendation and how these were coming up because they're kind of comic booky almost to a
Mm.
degree and with the music and stuff initially the 1980s Flash movie. I got like hints of that, but the biggest thing I got was a Haunted Mansion, Disney's Haunted Mansion kind of feel. And now that you mentioned that it was Disney animators who work on Little Mermaid, I can see the connection there.
Yeah, this was a like a little side job they took while they were working on Little Mermaid. So that's kind of interesting. And going back to the soundtrack thing, Kevin Tenney, the director, his brother did the score, and all of the songs but one that appear in the movie are all the director's brother. And of course, I have the soundtrack on cassette, as one should. What did you think of the soundtracks there?
I enjoyed it. I mean, I did as we kind of got into this. You had mentioned the one of the few previews you gave me was, hey, just so you remember that was the soundtrack from the first Squad Cobbler. And I don't typically pay a lot of attention to what you say on our shows,
Makes
but
sense.
as you mentioned it, it's like, oh yeah, so I had to go back and verify. But oh, okay, yeah, you did. So um, of the movie, I'd say one of the stronger aspects of the movie was the soundtrack.
Yeah, I think it's a good soundtrack. Now, what did you think of the cast? You had mentioned, one of the actresses going on a sleepaway camp. The main girl, the final girl, was in Dallas, which I never watched, but I know that's a big deal.
Yeah, so I thought, I mean, it's your standard 80s movie kind of fare in terms of acting ability, in general. Although uh the actress that played Angela, I thought, probably was like the most accomplished, if you will,
Well,
in
that's
terms of
because
the.
she's not just an actress. She was also a dancer. She was in, so my introduction to her was music videos. She was a dancer in a bunch of music videos, like 80s hair band videos. Then she was in this, and then she became a horse psychic. You
Okay.
heard that right? Um, I remember meeting her at I want to say it was Monster Mania. I was there promoting Evil Bong, and they were doing a Night of the Demons thing there to promote the movie because it had just had its first, at that time, first DVD release on Anchor Bay. So they were doing a screening of the movie and talking about the DVD. And Amelia Kincaid, who plays Angela, was there. And it was interesting because I got to, so the guests at the thing get to go in, they go in first and kind of set up in their areas in the ballroom and everything. So I'm just taking full advantage of the situation, get all my stuff signed and buy stuff before anybody else is in there, as you should. So I see her, I'm like, great, I can get my Night of the Demon stuff signed. We start talking to her, and I'm looking at her stuff, and she's got a bunch of stuff about horses. And we looked it up, and she was a horse psychic. I don't know if she was a psychic to all animals, but horses were definitely the focal point of it. So do with that as you will. And at the screening, someone raised their hand and asked a question, and I'm gonna say there was lights in her eyes and she couldn't see who raised their hand and asked the question. But whatever the question was, the response to it, she made some sort of sexual joke with it, and that 8-year-old's father was very upset. That 8-year-old girl's father did not appreciate it at the screening of the film later that night.
Yeah, let's go with the lights were bright.
That's what I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
The lights were in her eyes.
Yeah, I mean, and so in these movies, you don't expect a huge amount of character development or growth or backstory, and you don't get it here on that. I did feel that Sal was like the larva version of Andrew Dice Clay. So it's like
Yeah, I
you
can see
will
that.
eventually become Andrew Dice Clay if given enough time. And sadly, this larva didn't make it out of the movie. Again, spoiler, but he was like, okay, so this is like Andrew Dice Clay light. From there, um, the like I said, the kind of the two interesting things is that as I read post movie, uh, the there are two what I guess viewed as kind of iconic scenes or most pointed to scenes. There was the lipstick scene, and then the dance scene. And upon viewing it, I would have totally got, oh yeah, I bet you a lot of people talk about the lipstick scene. I get that. Um, but there's a lot of stuff about the dance scene, and um, I got to tell you, I didn't find it particularly memorable. Like,
Really?
okay, yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, it fit, I got it, but it wasn't like if I were to kind of look across the rest of this movie and kind of say what are like the big moments. Certainly, the lipstick scene is a big one from there, but I wouldn't have gone as that dance one as being the second most prominent. I would have gone maybe with a little of the casket action. Some of the stuff there maybe could have been been more talked about and reviewed. But I mean, nothing. There was anything wrong with it, but I just didn't view it as iconic as apparently I should have. So
Yeah, I absolutely love the dance scene. And it is, I mean, when you go to conventions and see Night of the Demon stuff, it is one of the things that people talk about with this movie. In fact, to gear up for this, because my new Blu-ray box set hasn't arrived yet, I believe it ships this week that we're recording this. To gear up for this, I was watching Joe Bob Briggs has a special on Shudder on Night of the Demons that is just about 3 hours long that they filmed live at the Mahoning Drive-In in Pennsylvania. And they spent a decent amount of time talking about it during that as well. It is one of the most notable things in the movie. I am surprised that you were indifferent towards it.
yeah, just I mean, I got it. I mean, in terms of what was going on at that point, but I was, as I kind of read after, it's like, I mean, yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, nothing wrong with it, but it just didn't. That wasn't like my big takeaway from there were other scenes that were a little more memorable for there. I found it super interesting for this genre movie at this time, and with the cast being top heavy, no pun intended, on females. um, that the not that there's anything wrong with it, but this is an hour and a half movie. We don't get the first kill. or the first topless portion until 50 minutes, 50 minutes into the movie. And then there is basically a 10-minute stretch, maybe 15, where all of that type of business, whether it's loss of life or loss of the blouse, only occur in that it's all right there. And for the most part, I mean, there's another, we get a character that kind of bites it. Sal meets his in outside of that packed window, but basically it's all kind of in that one little section. So you could, if you're so inclined, you could just pull this movie up, go to the 50-minute mark and watch for 10, 15 minutes, and you've got the main action.
Yeah, and I think so that's a thing with a lot of 80s movies in general, like where it takes a while for them to develop the characters. Usually that's a budgetary thing to pad it out with a lot of dialogue before you get to the expensive special effects stuff. I think in this case it's especially long though, because again, they're juggling 10 main characters in the location, which is a weird and crazy amount. Like watch any of these kind of movies. They're every Friday the 13th movie is about supposedly an entire working campground, and there's only like 4 people in this campground. Halloween 2 takes place in a hospital, and you only see like 3 nurses. There's they don't ever do this. And I think that's part of the problem with it. Because you do usually with these types of movies, it takes a little bit to get them going because of the character development for budgetary reasons. And now you're trying to introduce 10 different characters and how they all relate to each other. It's just a lot. And it is something they brought up a lot during that Joe Bob special as well. He mentioned multiple times that it's a lot of characters to keep track of in this movie. A weird amount for a low budget horror movie. Going back to the dance really quick, that is the one song that wasn't done by Kevin Tenney's brother. That Stigmata Martyr from Bauhaus.
Yeah, I thought it was there's nothing wrong with the scene. I just didn't, didn't hold
I
it to
love
the
it.
same high regard that a lot of other folks in terms of
Are
portions
you
of the
saying you
movie.
hate horses? Is that
Yeah,
you're an
no, I mean, and
anti-equestrian?
yeah, so but what I'm not a big fan of is horse psychics because it's a pretty easy job. It's like you're gonna be glue, you're gonna be a paintbrush. These are the things that you would be able to tell a horse, and so I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I think I could do that. So
Well, as far as the cast, I would also mention that I'm going to say one of the most important actresses ever, but definitely of my generation and the most important person for my formative years. Linnea Quigley is in this, and she has the lipstick scene, which you mentioned. So you did take note of the lipstick scene then.
yeah, I did, and so I cheated a little bit. In terms of as I was watching it, I had already jumped to IMDb and was kind of going through some of the trivia and all that as I'm kind of going through the movie, kind of biding my time through the first 50 minutes to get to some stuff. And they early on, while not all context were provided, they talked about, well, yeah, of course, then they needed to make a prosthetic of her upper body and for the lipstick scene. And I'm trying to piece together why that would have been necessary. And then I see the scene, it's like, oh, that's why it's necessary. But yeah, she's a um uh she gets some pretty good airtime in this movie.
So Linnea Quigley, for anybody watching this who doesn't know, is a huge horror movie actress. She did tons and tons of giant successful movies, cult movies, weird indie movies. She had her own workout video. She is the focal point of so many action figures and t-shirts and posters. I'm not even sure that you could keep track of all of that. I have a giant Linnea Quigley poster that she signed for me, that my wife got for me. Huge fan, huge fan. Very important in my formative years as a young boy because in nearly all of her movies, she's naked. So it would be weird if she wasn't after a certain point. This is her second best or most memorable for me in terms of naked death or naked weird special effect thing. Because she is in my favorite Christmas movie, Silent Night, Deadly Night, where she gets, while topless, of course, impaled on deer antlers. So obviously It's art. Uh, in this movie, though, she sticks a lipstick tube, spoiler alert for a 35-year-old movie, through her nipple. And honestly, the effect still kind of holds up considering how old this movie is.
Yeah, I mean, and not that I was paying super close attention, but
Just from the cursory glance in
just
your
a
peripheral
cursory
vision.
glance during the scene, I was, oh, that's interesting. I was like, continue to kind of scroll through the trivia at this point. Um, uh, so it is, um, if you're looking close, not that I was, but if you happen to be looking close, the transition from the actual remarkable young lady to the prosthetic, you can kind of say, oh, okay, there's a slide, but it
Hmm.
was not it was not significant. They did a really good job. Really good
Yeah,
job
especially
with it.
for that time. I mean, if you can't, so you can tell the difference, especially watching in HD. You can see the difference between her real skin and the prosthetic, but it's pretty good. Like it looks really close. And especially when you compare it to contemporary movies that had bigger budgets, like the Friday the 13th movies, those don't hold up really well, particularly in HD. If you watch, I know the scene is famous and people love it, but when Kevin Bacon gets stabbed through the neck in Friday the 13th, it looks like it's a gray pillow sitting under his head that they're stabbing. Like it is, and I love Tom Savini's work. And at the time, it was such an iconic scene, but watching in HD, it is not even vaguely realistic looking. So the fact that this looks as good as it does, and I would assume the special effects artist spent extra time doing the prosthetic for Linnea Quigley because they got married
Yeah.
after this movie. So
Yeah, well, and I could see why if he's building that prosthetic, it's kind of like, so what are you doing after the casting? So, but yeah, she's highly memorable on there, and unless you had hit pause for maybe a while earlier in the
for
scene
any reason,
for any reason you needed to vacuum something like that, then you could kind of see the difference upon further closer inspection, but still really well executed. But yeah, I was trying to piece, because at that point I knew, okay, there is a big scene, it's a lipstick scene, and there's a prosthetic involved. And then I was like, oh wow, that was unexpected. Even when I had knew the basic building blocks, I wasn't ready for quite how it played out. But she did a
it's a
nice job.
memorable scene and it's one that I enjoy. So there's two parts in this movie that I really enjoy showing this movie to people who've never seen it. The lipstick scene, just not even for shock value, it's just really well done. And it's not at all where you think it's going to go when you initially start watching the scene. So that's always cool. That always gets a good reaction from people. That and Sal's line, I live in a nice house, the kind with plastic slip covers on the furniture, makes people who are at least my age laugh really hard. A younger person, I think I would have to explain that to them, but I distinctly remember the plastic slip covers on the furniture.
Yeah, and introduce a little editing work for myself. I'm actually surprised that the whole "eat a bowl of" wasn't top line for you. But,
See, Kelly with there is a lot of really good lines in this though.
yep, yep. And then we get closure on the the old man that you feel a little sorry for, then you don't feel sorry for, and then you really start to dislike at the very end of the movie. Um, uh, I tried to figure out, his wife seemed to be, there was just the dots I couldn't connect. Is that uh so he gets his comeuppance for being an apple razor blade apple guy. He gets some closure on that since his wife baked an apple pie for him. But I didn't quite get, maybe she was just embittered because this guy was a jerk and she's like, time to take you out. So I didn't entirely get how calm and cool and collected she was around that. Plus, I'm going to argue mild suspension of disbelief needed to say, if you are eating a large number of razor blades, I think that you would know that.
Yeah, that's even when I was a kid, that was my problem with that scene. I did like it because I felt like it justified that opening scene with him, but Yeah, I was like, there's no way he's already swallowed the razor blades and now it's starting to bother him. Like, I can tell if there's something weird, like a hard piece, edge, or corner in my food that I'm eating. There's no way I'm biting into full razor blades and like, I'll just choke this down and see what happens. So that part I didn't believe. As far as the wife being calm, though, they mentioned that on the Joe Bob's thing too. But if you listen to her dialogue beforehand, she's making comments about how he used to be different and has changed and things. So I kind of got the impression he's a dick to her too. So this is just her revenge. She knew that he did this, so this is just her revenge on
I think
him.
it's about time to take him out. Well, good for her.
That's the way I took that anyway. So were you enough of a fan that you would check out the sequels?
So I think I will. I'm the remake. I watched the trailer for it, and um, it doesn't. I mean, it appears there are elements of it that kind of carry forward, but I don't know how true it's going to be. But
I it's a good movie and it's one of the better remakes of that period because it came out in that time when they were just remaking anything to try and make a quick buck off of it. It really the strength of the remake, because I do like it, is that it's really not a remake of the movie. It's different characters, different story. It just uses the same premise of they're having a Halloween party at a funeral home. Shenanigans ensue after a seance. So it's the same setup, but different characters. It plays out completely differently. The only things I would say negative about the remake is it tries. So one of the complaints I see a lot about, particularly this first movie, is that there's no real explanation of the demons. They're just there and they have the seance and it unleashes them. And there's no like backstory for the demons, which I'm actually fine with because a lot of movies at that time, they would try and give convoluted or even sympathetic backstories to characters that were just unnecessary. These are the characters. They're trying to survive this thing that's happening to them. It's just meant to be entertaining. I think people are just looking for too deeply into certain things sometimes. And that's where the remake kind of falters for me is they give like a convoluted, overly explained backstory to everything that's totally unnecessary. You could just cut all of that out of the movie and the movie would still exist exactly the same way.
yeah.
And the way there is some callbacks to this, and there's a great Linnea Quigley cameo in it. So
Oh,
it's worth watching just for that. But there is a callback to the lipstick scene, and not a single person that I know has enjoyed the way they did the lipstick scene. So
okay. Well, yeah, because it was kind of like with Sleepaway Camp, is that kind of as I read about the sequels, they kind of will minorly or wildly depart from the
yeah,
source material. So I would probably do a rewatch of this before I would go to one of the sequels, but I'll probably check one of them out or one or
I
two of them out.
highly, highly recommend the second movie, Night of the Demons 2. It's just more of this, but with a much bigger budget because this movie was a big hit. So you get to see a lot of really cool, really big special effects scenes in it.
Yep.
So because they made all this money off this one, they were like, let's double down. So with a huge budget in comparison to this one, you get a lot of really cool, practical, old school special effects.
Well, this is the start of our Halloween content. Plenty more coming for the month of October. You'll keep hearing whether it's gaming or other movies. We're going to keep rolling out some Halloween stuff. And the World Shorts podcast, Hard No, completely dedicated to Halloween for the month of October. So there's that.
So short, but so hard.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bog Panda.